All right, BlakBoxx Radio. We're zooming today. BlakBoxx Radio in tandem with AmASSI, the AmASSI Center of Black Wellness and Culture, right?
Yep,
Right,
that's
you?
it. Yep, that's it.
Okay. The illustrious Dr. Cleo Manago.
Right. He's been on BlakBoxx Radio a couple times already. We published his first interview, I think, back in February.
Yep.
And then he also came in and did a Rona report. Both times he brought a lot of really powerful information. So make sure you go to blackboxradio.com. You can find his other interviews if you want to learn a bit more about him.
Exactly. Dr. Cleo is definitely a family member with BlakBoxx Radio. But we also invited other people
Right, right.
to speak on this.
Yes, we didn't even say what the topic is yet. What are we
Yeah,
talking
I'm getting
about?
ready to say to speak on this Zoom, and the topic is the white. What is it?
White involvement.
Uprising.
Yeah,
The uprising of white involvement in Black protests,
right.
and we felt it was a phenomenon that we've never seen in our 26 years of life. Reggie,
26 years of life. Well,
we're young.
right. I think
So,
that
and our young life, we've never seen this much white involvement in any protest. So we thought it was pivotal to talk about it.
right. Yeah, it is different this time. I think the nature of this protest is turning out to be sort of a generation changing event, given how long things are going on and the global scope of it. So I
Yeah.
think it is important to try to unpack what makes this one different and what our experience is. And specifically, what your experience was in Baltimore when you kind of saw with your own eyes what was going on.
Exactly. And so the folks we have with us, they're going to introduce themselves, so we don't have to do that.
Right.
But we definitely wanted to delve into into this topic, and I think it's so good for the community because we're seeing things that we've never seen. We're in COVID-19, which is a shift,
Right.
a reset. Racism has been prevalent in this society from the beginning, and we're seeing a shift in the faces of the protest and the fight. And that's hence why we're doing this Zoom to kind of get the other side, because we're Black individuals, and
Right.
we wanted to get the depiction of actual white people who are protesting and also have a voice in this in our racist struggles. So that's what the Zoom is about. Dr. Cleo Manago with the AmASSI Center, and me and G, BlakBoxx Radio, and our folks, and we just gonna talk about it.
Yeah, we starting out with Dr. Cleo. So he's going to be the first person that you see. And we'll get back with you afterwards to kind of give you some of our thoughts.
Deuces.
I am a behavioral health analyst and cultural anthropologist. I also run the AmASSI Center for Black Wellness and Culture in Baltimore. And all that stuff really means that I'm a very dimensional Black human rights activist.
Okay. Wow. All right. And then I reached out. I had to call Kris Furnish because she was a Black activist before it was sexy, being a white girl. So we had to get Kris on the panel. So Kris, tell the people who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kris Furnish. Originally from Florida, but I live here in Washington, D.C. Queenie and I met at a protest against police brutality when a young man was paralyzed by the police. We went out to protest in PG, I believe that was PG County. So yeah, I'm here. Thank you guys.
And then I reached out to G, and G said, I have some great people to be on the panel. So G, who are the people that you kind of brought into our existence?
Yeah, so the person that I invited that is here right now is Tiffany Black. And Tiffany I met Tiffany about 6 years ago. And we worked together for several years. She started Video Lab, which is a program over at Micah Place, which is actually how I met Queen. So that's kind of a chain that kind of connects all the way back to 2014 when I first met Tiffany at National Night Out, which is the annual event where they do events all around the city for public safety. Interestingly enough, they were having like a resource fair out in the park near my house. And so that's where I met Tiff, learned about Video Lab, and we started collaborating then. So I'll let Tiffany say a little bit about her story, who she is.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Yeah, so that was when I was finishing up the community arts program at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And I was awarded a community grant to continue my work after school. So I used that money to start Video Lab as a way to extend the resources of the art school to the surrounding community, to open up those video resources. And I met Jared day one. I was out there advertising for our first free workshop. So Jared's been part of Video Lab since day one and runs it now. So now I'm based in New York, where I'm an artist, but I am currently actually doing artist residency in Arkansas, in the Ozark Mountains. So I am also very honored to be here. So thank you for including me.
All right. So, and I reached out to John Lefkowits. He did a Rona report, and he said he was a psychologist, and he had such heavy views when he did his Rona report. So we said he needs to be a part of this panel. We need a voice from Fulton, Maryland. So, John Lefkowits, are you there?
I sure am, and thank you, Queen. Grateful to have an opportunity to be part of this group. Yeah, I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist here in Central Maryland and Fulton, Maryland. And yeah, I think I got to meet you through my lovely wife, who I know worked with you on a couple of occasions, Queen. So yeah, delighted to be here. Looking forward to our discussion.
All right. So G, you have a few other people.
Well, I think these folks were invited or who came through the link or.
Okay.
Yeah, Tiffany is the only panelist that I invited, and I know Jenny just from meeting her before. I get Tiffany, you invited Jenny. I don't know David, and we know Kris still down here.
Yep. So let's just jump right in. So this is a conversation about the uprising of white involvement in Black protests. So the biggest question I've gotten from the community is, why is the presence now so that we see so many white kids and white people a part of this protest at this point? Why did that happen? And what was the precipice for that? Brother Cleo?
I'm the first white person to talk? Okay.
Yes, the first white person.
Because, I thought he was asking white folks why they are suddenly in more numbers than relatively previously involved in Black murder-inspired protests. I think before I do speak, Queen, I think we should hear from some of these people who look like the folks you're talking about.
That might be true. I would just wanted to see like a behavior standpoint, but that'd be great. So anybody jump in.
I can assure you I'm going to give my behavioral analysis and perspective on the whole issue, but I want to have a context in which you respond to, which is centered around the question.
Absolutely. Okay, so I guess that would be Kris. Can you give us a little insight into that?
So we're talking about why the presence of white people is growing in protests surrounded by murders of Black men and women, and
Yep.
I think it's honestly, the younger generation is just is not born in an age where, you know, people believe in that kind of stuff, and it's really dying out. Those beliefs are really fading away as the older generations are, you know, leaving this earth. And um, I think it's just a matter of that racism just starting to die away, and people of younger generations just saying, you know, this is crazy, this is ridiculous. What is racism in anyways? And I know I'm from the South, so I was raised around people who have, you know, racist tendencies and thoughts and perceptions of other people, even own members of my family. And so me as an individual, I've been fighting, I've been protesting this racism amongst my own community and my own family, and you know, people I've grown up with and gone to school with my entire life. And I think it's just people coming together and saying enough is enough. Young people especially. So that is my 2 cents.
Okay, so young people are spearheading. You feel that young people don't have the baggage that us older folks have, and they really see that this is lunacy and we need to change.
Right.
So it's the youth, because I see a lot of young people at these protests. So, Sister Tiffany, what do you think about the presence of white people in this protest?
I think it's heartening to see a lot more white presence and white people taking ownership of their place in this conversation. And I think it's also heartening to see a lot more white people believing Black people. To me, that's a very positive thing that has added to a higher presence of white people in these protests like this. And you know, I think coronavirus does have a part to play in it. You know, people are home. They're either not working or working from home and have more time and energy to put into this. So I do think that that's worth mentioning. But I also like to hope that white people are starting to see, okay, this is a cycle that keeps repeating itself, of violence against Black people, especially at the hands of the police and our racist structures of our society. So these cycles keep happening, and what's changing? So this time around, this conversation, I'm hearing more and more, white people, what are you doing to step up? What kind of inner reflection are you doing to self-educate and figure out what is your part in this conversation? And so I like to think that has a lot to do with the higher numbers.
Great assessment. Great assessment. Okay. Brother John, from a psychologist standpoint, what do you think the presence of our white brothers and sisters being present in the protests? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's critical for change to occur in the broader society and culture. I mean, unfortunately, in our country, the only way change is really going to happen is if white people get involved. And you know, I understand, whether I like it or not, I'm privileged. I mean, this country was built for white people, white men in particular. You know, I've had every privilege possible just by, you know, the dice roll of birth, of being born male and white in an upscale suburb of New York. So, but the problem is if, you know, someone like George Floyd can't breathe and is murdered in public by an alleged officer of the law, then, as others have said, none of us can breathe. And I think we're clearly living in a society built on, you know, extraordinary injustice, slavery, genocide of the Native Americans. And we've never really confronted our history as Americans. And unfortunately, the whitewashing is going on till present day and is unfortunately really embodied in the current White House. So, you know, I think it's certainly I want to do my small part by going to a protest. And I think, you know, psychologically, I think a lot of people have woken up with extraordinarily disturbing, you know, I mean, it's just a kind of a snowball effect of extraordinarily disturbing videos, particularly the most recent one with the public lynching of George Floyd, which I know we can all, you know, recognize was just beyond appalling, and even I think contributed to some kind of mass trauma, which we're all needing to come together for proper redress. So I think there's just so many different factors, and I think racism is a crucial and important piece, but I also think there's a socioeconomic piece, there's a class piece, there's a lot that's built into systems and institutions. It's going to require a lot of people to work hard at making significant changes.
Great. I'd like to have a comment. Excuse me. Kris mentioned that from her perspective, young people have possibly a new perspective compared to people from the past. Twice, Tiffany Black mentioned that she would like to hope that things have changed and that she would like to think that things have changed. And then she mentioned COVID. And I agree with that, that's relevant here. And I'll get to my perspective in a moment. And Mr. Lefkowits talked about being privileged and talked about where he came from and things along those lines. I think it's important, particularly given what you said, Kris, to understand that, for example, in Charlottesville and in many of the attacks, a lot of these people are young white people. The murderers, some of them were young white people. And David Chauvin, I think that's his name was, who murdered Floyd, was not an elderly man. There are lots of young people, male and female, who are involved in violence toward Black people, who are involved in, like there's a video that was on a show that I saw recently where there were some young white kids who were at a protest who were making fun of George Floyd. And there's pictures that have come out with young people, young white males and females hanging around them, you know, kind of egging them on, where they're joking, they have each other on each other's neck, trying to make fun of what happened to George Floyd. So given that, and I can go on with many more examples, I don't see this as something from the past and from an older generation that a younger generation is resistant to. And when I hear Tiffany say that she would like to hope that things are better, I'm not sure she believes that things really are better when she frames it like that. And I want to reiterate that I agree with her that COVID-19, which has led to unemployment, which has led to social restriction, which has led to kids not being in school, young people not being able to go to school. And there were people, particularly white people, before Floyd was murdered, who made the news because they were relatively large groups, not mass groups like the protests, but really relatively large groups of white people in the Midwest and other parts of the country protesting the social distancing. You might have seen some of that in the news. So before giving my perspective on what I think the uprising is about, I just wanted to underscore some of the things that was said and also just challenge the idea that these are a bunch of people who are not like the older people. That has not been what I've witnessed. And I think while we ponder what I'm saying, we can still remember the question is what is leading to the apparent uprising of white people involved in Black protest.
But you know, I'm curious, Cleo, because I'm not sure I would frame it as a. I mean, it's true. It is a Black protest, but in a lot of ways, I see this as a human protest, as a protest against injustice, against racism, against intolerance, against police brutality. And again, it's sort of a given. Most of that is directed at people of color. But I see this in much broader terms. Yes, it's about Black Lives Matter, indeed. But I think it's also about broader societal issues. Whereas, of course, the focus is about Black lives and police brutality directed against people of color.
Well, consider this.
May I for a second?
Sure.
John, I understand exactly what you're saying. It is clearly there are a lot of other issues that are being brought to the table here. One of the things that I find interesting is sometimes when it does spread that way, the original point kind of gets lost. So all of these other issues get pulled into the conversation, and the primary issue kind of gets lost in all the noise. Mm-hmm. So it sprawls out and stops being about what it was originally about. And all of these other ideas and other concerns get pulled into the back door, and the will to change is dispersed. So it takes a lot of momentum and focus to make substantial change. And when that will gets dispersed and diluted through all of these other ideas, a lot of times you don't get what you initially set out to get. So that's one of the things that kind of comes up for me when I think about how all of these other very important and valid ideas and things that raise people's attention, when they get hauled into a protest, it sometimes confuses and disperses the attention, and we don't get what we're looking for.
Right. No, I'm sorry. By no means was I attempting to dilute that this is about police, that this is about Black Lives Matter. This is about police brutality directed at people of color. But I'm just speaking to more, in a broader way. I think it can also speak to, and that may be part of what provides the impulse for some people who are of the majority culture, who are white, to be part of this, because this just profound and extraordinary, injustice, intolerance, and racism that's been part and parcel of our society and culture for so long. It's unconscionable. It just can't. I mean, we have to do everything we can to try to make that, try to change that.
I would like to reiterate the question of why white involvement was in other considerations. From my perspective, when Amadou Diallo was murdered, that was heart-wrenching and heart-breaking. When Eula Love, who some of you are too young to remember, or too far from the Black community to remember, if you're beyond 50, it's still heartbreaking for me. Eula Love in South Central Los Angeles in 1979 was a Black woman who couldn't afford to pay her gas bill. And the gas man came out to turn her gas off. And she had 4 little children. And she came out and asked the man not to go in the back and turn her gas off. And she went into the house and got a butter knife. Those knives that only cut butter, they're too dull to cut anything else. She got a butter knife and said, please do not turn off the gas because I have children. Then he called the police. The police came, and within 2 minutes, she was shot to death and killed. And in front of her children, she was trying to protect from the winter. So I have tons of heart-wrenching stories, but there was no phone, the cell phones or the smartphones back then. And they were just like there weren't no smartphones when Amadou Diallo was murdered or when Sean Bell was murdered, and I can go on and on. But there hasn't been smartphones since Mike Brown was murdered, since Sandra Bland was murdered, since Samir Rice was murdered, since Trayvon was murdered, though that was not caught on videotape. So my point, in terms of reiterating the question, is why now? Because why didn't the murder of a 12-year-old child in a park not result in this kind of reaction? Why did the full footage of Eric Garner's murder, which is on tape, result in this kind of response? When Castillo was sitting in his car, being very respectful to the police, calling him sir and everything, and said, "Sir, just so you can know I have a gun, and he was murdered within moments after that on video live with his bloody girlfriend sitting next to him and his bloody girlfriend's daughter screaming and hollering in the back seat. Those are pretty, and there's more. I'm just covering some of the bases. Those are pretty morbid, horrendous, horrible things that were captured on video for the nation to see. And so that's why giving those stories, to bring it back up to why I'm having this question, why now? And I think it's important, at least for me, to break down explicitly what the factors are so we don't fool ourselves and to think something is going on that may or may not be going on. Because what you mentioned, Lefkowits, was how horrendous George Floyd's murder was. Well, Trayvon Martin was missing for 3 days, and his parents didn't even know where he was, and his license was in his pocket, but he was made a John Doe because of racism, and they found out 3 days from the day of his murder that he was murdered. Those are pretty horrendous, atrocious, heart-wrenching things, and that's just some of the stories. There's other horrible stories that have been going on that white people know about for centuries, decades, weeks, months. Walter Scott, who was murdered casually by a very kickback white man who just shot him while chilling. So given that we have all these examples of videotape brutal murder of innocent, unarmed Black people, what's going on now?
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds of, there must be hundreds of thousands of examples of innocent, unarmed Black people being murdered by white people in an authority position.
And vigilantes who are not in authority position. And vigilantes like George Zimmerman.
Vigilantes, right. Absolutely.
In Georgia, they were everyday white folks.
Oh yeah, that's true. They were
the last word that young man heard in his whole existence was "fuck that nigga." That was the last terms he heard while he was dying.
Wow.
Yeah, sadly, there's parts of the country where this kind of racism is more explicit and more widely tolerated by certain subcultures, and that's even more unconscionable and harder to make changes in unless it really is there has to be such a strong cultural and societal push for that.
But the question is, why now? In terms of white involvement, that's the topic.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Could be white guilt.
Well, you weren't guilty after Tamir Rice. Why the guilt now in terms of in the streets?
And it's a good question, and it's the reason I said white guilt is because it's what I'm feeling as a white individual right now in this moment. Like, why now? Why didn't I do something when Sandra Bland died? When and so why couldn't we as a collective? And I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's like Malcolm Gladwell's concept of a tipping point. I mean, I just think there's, I think it's multifactorial. I think there's so many different elements in the culture going on, as I think Tiffany mentioned. I mean, the COVID-19, it's not only that there's a pandemic going on, but as we know, it's sadly disproportionately affecting Black communities, not only in terms of the infection rate, but in terms of the death rate for a whole, and that just screams out about the inequality.
But that's not why white people are showing up to protest because of COVID.
No, that's not, no, but I'm saying that the fact that white people are showing up to protest, it has to do with seeing perhaps more clearly the profound inequalities in our society, and that's one piece that's coming more and more to light. And I just think it's a tipping point of so many of these things over so long. Yeah, should it have I think your point, Cleo, is that why is it taken until 2020? This has been going on since 1619, or literally for hundreds of years. But I mean, I think it's important also, rather than to see this as in a way that's kind of punitive, or, well, it's about time y'all are finally joining such a critical struggle that's been in your face for so long. Instead, I think it's important to celebrate it, to support it, to and to be, and to be part of it as much as possible.
Well, Brother John, can I step in for a second? I understand your perspective. It comes from a perspective that now people are woke, and that in other words, you're saying, since you guys are present, let's take it from here. But you have to look at the relationship that Black people have had with white people and with the rules of this country. And it's very hard for us to trust that type of presence because of the history of the relationship. So to you, you come from a place where there's been no attack, where you have not had the type of experiences that we've been experiencing. So you're saying, since you guys are here now, you're our allies, and we should deal with that. And we say thank you in some ways, but in other ways, from the relationships that we've had prior and the climate of this country, it is very hard for us to trust that type of presence. And I think you're not understanding the kind of questioning of why are you present. Mm-hmm. You understand? It's not just like, we're not celebrating it. What we're saying is, why is it happening in such enormous numbers at this point and at this time? Yeah. So that's where we're saying is, how do we even trust that type of presence? Do you kind of get that?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point, Queen. And it's and that's absolutely, understood that you should be mistrustful. And will this just, once some of the intensity of this dissipates, will the white people who've been going to these protests, will they just kind of drift off and disappear? I mean, those are good questions. It just seems like, that it's important from I think there's so many wrongs and injustices that have occurred in this country to people of color, not just the recent cases in the last few weeks or months, names we're all sadly familiar with, but for literally hundreds of years. And as Cleo pointed out, we haven't had most of those on film. But now I think, and that distrust is perfectly understandable. But again, what we need to do is we need to have all of our voices heard, and most importantly, we need to have all of our votes counted in November to really make more, to help to facilitate more institutional change.
Okay. I want to be clear about that. I don't have it's an about time, because not enough has happened for me to have that perspective. So I don't have an about time perspective. I want to make that clear, because nothing has happened in terms of transformation societally, and I don't feel like my life is less threatened yet. So I don't have an about time perspective at all. And I don't feel like I'm being punitive, because I'm just on Zoom, in a Zoom interface, having a conversation and trying to deconstruct what's going on here. In this instance, from a white perspective, since that's the central topic in terms of why you're involved. And I don't feel grateful for white people being involved. I need more information first. And that's what I'm looking for, not only among the people that are in this discussion, but, my office is in Baltimore, near just a block from where Baltimore protests were happening. And there were people walking down my predominantly Black street, white folks with signs saying whites should stop being silent, and whites should, and Black Lives Matters, of course. There were signs all over the place. And I actually asked these young people, questions about, what's going on. I asked the Black people questions too. But my point to you, was that I'm just searching out to find out what's going on from white people's perspective. And I don't have any conclusions yet including About Time.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's valid. Tiffany, I would like to hear a little from you.
Yes, thank you. So I definitely have some thoughts, and I agree with Dr. Manago, your points that it's not like any of this has gotten worse. It's being filmed now, and maybe perhaps, you know, those horrible videos being more widespread might be adding to the outrage and the consciousness of white people that, yes, this is a reality, this is really happening in our country. I did want to, I just found out this week that I'm living, I mentioned that I'm down in Arkansas right now, and I'm living only 2 hours away from the headquarters of the KKK, which is in Harrison, Arkansas. And I've done a little bit of research, and this is a small town of only about 13,000 people. And last week they did have a protest in honor of George Floyd, and it looked like they had about 300 people come out, and there was an opposition. There was a group of white supremacists who came with their rifles, their Confederate flags. Everything remained peaceful. The white nationalists said that they were there to protect property and keep, you know, in case things got out of hand. But the protesters who were interviewed were saying that 5 to 10 years ago, that a demonstration like that would not have even been possible. It would not have been allowed to even take place there. So that does bring another question up to me. You know, does that mean that things are possibly changing in our society? That more white people are really joining in on this fight? To me, that seems like a positive example that hopefully times are changing. But, you know, this other question is coming up too now in this discussion of the performative ally. And that is a new term, at least to me, that I am just now hearing and really trying to understand. Queen's got some sirens going on.
Yeah, sorry the noise, guys. You know, inner city living. Pardon me. Go ahead.
Yes. That's one thing I'm not hearing down here in the Ozark Mountains.
Okay, well.
Yeah. Yes, but this whole idea of the performative ally, and what is that, and why are white people being so offended by that term? You know, I really appreciate the conversations that are calling us to be very deeply reflective on our place within these conversations about race and what it means to be an anti-racist. What does that work actually mean? Dismantling white supremacy and you know, this privilege that we have in this society that was built for white people. What does that mean for white people, and what does that look like? And do we really have the courage to take part in this, or are we just out there protesting because we want to make sure that we were on the right side of history? You know what I mean? So yeah, I guess I don't, it's not that I have the answers. I definitely have the questions as well. I saw this meme on Instagram yesterday that said something like, isn't it crazy how we all just went from learning how to bake bread from scratch to dismantling white supremacy within the span of 2 weeks? Which is kind of a funny way to put it, but it makes you stop to think. People are complaining about being bored in their houses, and oh, I'm so bored, there's nothing to do, I'm just stuck at home all the time. Well, why don't I go out and like dismantle our society, our racist society? Well,
it's going to take a little more than what
I want to acknowledge real quick. Crystal had her hand up. Did you have a comment, Chris? I see your hand up.
Yes, I do. I did have a comment.
Okay.
Sorry. So from my perspective, I don't really feel like, and it's not so much a trust issue as it is, once again, us not being able to be in control or in charge of our own movement. I do believe that our white friends, family, neighbors do have a movement that they need to do for their own accountability, for their own repairing their own mental thought process toward Black and brown people. But I believe that that is something that is their own separate, and should be their own separate cross to bear, and not intertwined within what we are asking for, because they're never going to feel what we feel the way we feel it. There have been videos played and seen, and we just upgraded it now to body cameras, but there's been videos where that's been out for years. And so I guess my thought process is, so was it more heart-wrenching to see someone with a knee on their neck than it is to see somebody getting shot in the back, to see someone getting shot in the face? Was that more heart-wrenching because it was a different form of killing? He cried out for his mother. It was longer. I'm just not understanding the thought process of what made this more horrific than any other killings. I mean, even if you want to go way back in time and see people hanging from a tree, I mean, what is more horrific now? So my conclusive thought is, yes, there is a place, but I believe that it's not a place that's entwined. I do believe that there are things that people are feeling guilty about, things that people have been silent about, and things that need to be addressed within our white brothers' communities amongst themselves, to get that point across of what they are feeling and what they need to be responsible for and responsible to. Because it has not gotten better, but what we have to do is, it's everything that we do, it's almost like outside people come in and take some level of authority over that. We need to be authority and leaders of our own movement the way we need our movement to be. It's not that we're not feeling okay with and saying, oh, well, maybe they see it or they get it, but we don't know from what perspective. Like, you guys can't really understand our mindset. We don't know from what perspective you guys really get it, or if it's, for some people, it's an opportunity right now because there's not much else to do, but I'm not going for the well, it's videotaped now and whatever. It's been videotaped. It didn't matter. We thought that taking video into the courts and things like that, it doesn't matter, because Black lives don't seem to matter in the United States, which we built. So understandably, and to your point about privilege and the way the U.S. was built, understandably, but our toil and sweat and tears, and those of our Native American brothers and sisters, went to build this country. So it's like it doesn't matter. So we need to understand. We really need to understand from what perspective. And and I know that there were white brothers and sisters in the civil rights movement, but the civil rights movement didn't move us very far, because we still are looked at as subhuman citizens, and we don't have civil rights. Our civil rights don't matter. So how can we move parallel to each other with our own causes that intersect at creating a United States where all lives matter, no matter what?
Great point. I mean, that's a valid point.
So I have something about working with young people who are of the age of the young people who are out there from all different aspects. I think a lot of the motivation is really about signaling to their peers, the behavior that has kind of developed over the course of the last several years, where everyone is pretty much living their lives publicly, online, they sharing everything that they do. And there is sort of their habitual way of being. So there's really no hiding place for a young person, because everyone is always used to seeing everything that they do. And a lot of times ideas and activities and stuff kind of swell just from the fact of young people signaling to each other and seeking status among themselves. And it is not even, it's connected somewhat to the issue, but really it's about the status that they're seeking amongst themselves and what their friends think. I mean, for young people, what your friends and what your peers think about you is an incredible incentive. It is paramount for young people to have the right standing among their peers. And the way that they display that standing now is performatively on social media. They stage their entire lives, from the way the angles they put out on pictures to stories that they tell through their feed. It's a behavior that's developed in the last several years in the way that people present themselves. So I want to put out that part of the performative nature that some of the people who are involved now, especially the young people, is really an extension of the performative way that they have been signaling to each other all along. So all it takes is a few influential people who are setting a trend, and everybody else just wants to signal that they are. It's a very low friction thing just to put up a black square or whatever. It's a low friction thing just to send a signal to say, hey, you know, I'm with you. And it's easier to do that than to not. So I think there are a lot of people who are involved to the degree that it's easier to do it than to not do it. So there's like some social accountability built in there.
I think that's an extremely important piece. And I want to add to that the social performance may not have nothing to do with who people really are.
Right.
It's a peer group performance process that's not necessarily based on who they are at their core. It's a public performance, sometimes based on likes. And in this instance, not necessarily YouTube or Facebook likes, but societal likes. We all know that even though people are called a Facebook friend, 99% of the people who you call your Facebook friend, you never even met, you don't even know. And the term friend does have a specific meaning, but it loses its real meaning in that context. So I just want to reiterate and support what you just said, brother, because the performance piece, with it being indeed a performance, sometimes is an important piece, I think, going on right now.
That's a whole other aspect. People are performing. So this is, and signaling. Never thought of that. All right, anybody else want to chime into that?
I just want to say that I think us as white people have a big job to do. You know, it's not just about going out one day and protesting in front of your town hall or state capitol or whatever. It's about addressing it whenever you see it, wherever you see it, amongst whoever you're around. That's a way of, you know, somewhat breaking down that, you know, that racist, you know, thought process and just perception of other people. Is just that as white people always call it out when you see it. That's like the least we can do.
Yeah, I want to just, I think that's a great point, Kris. I think that's just so important, both in explicit and implicit ways. In other words, you know, clearly if you see a wrong going on, if you see some intolerance or racism, doing whatever you can to call it out in the moment. But I think there's other smaller things you can do. And again, I'm not trying to give myself a pat on the back, but the professional organizations I'm in are predominantly overwhelmingly white, because it's judges, it's lawyers, it's forensic psychologists in the family law sphere. And yes, there's a few, you do see a few people of color, but I always make, and again, I say this with all due, it sounds maybe slightly immodest, I don't mean it that way, but I know I always go out of my way to introduce myself to somebody of color, and just, as I might do with somebody who's white, just because, you're at a conference in New Orleans or Boston or Chicago or wherever, and you're meeting people, and I think people tend to gravitate more toward people who are like themselves. But I always try to push myself and stretch by meeting people who are definitely unlike me, because I think it's important. And then, for those people who may feel a little uncomfortable in a predominantly white environment, that the more, we can do as the kind of majority race in a particular, even professional environment, I think it's incumbent on us to make folks like them feel welcome, to say nothing of the fact when you see some injustice going on, within the best of your ability to call that out.
Mr. Lefkowits, you're a psychologist? You're a psychologist?
I am a board-certified clinical psychologist with a forensic specialty, Dr. Cleo.
Okay, so you understand how the mind works, and conscious and unconsciousness, right?
Well, I have some understanding of that.
Okay, I mention that because, and I don't want necessarily us to go on a tangent with this, but language is the furniture of our minds. It's where it's a process of linguistics that we use to express how we see the world. And language and English is full of white supremacist linguistic norms. Little white lies, and there's no such thing in this country as a term black slavery. There's a term white slavery, but you don't need the term black on slavery because it's redundant in the white supremacist society. Slave means black. But when you say white slavery, you have to say white slavery. You never heard people used to say terms like there's black slavery going on over there. I'm just giving examples of language. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm giving that example is because the term people of color is problematic, because especially when you're talking about black people specifically, because people of color in theory means people who are not white, or so-called non-whites. That means it refers to Asians, Latinos, etc. Sure. But black means black. And one of the primary problems we hear, particularly as manifested by police department, is lethal levels of anti-blackness, not anti-people of color, because Asians ain't going through this at this level. And even relative to black people, Latinos aren't going through this at this level. So I think it's important to understand that people of color is a problematic term because it really means non-white, which is a white supremacist hierarchical term. And we should say black if we're talking about black people, or Asian if we're talking about Asian people, or Native if we're talking about Native people, because there's different experiential phenomena that comes with those labels and experiences. And right now we're talking about the murder of black folks. I want to mention that. I also want to mention that in terms of performance, I think you know that the NFL just apologized for racism. Did you know that?
Did hear that.
Yeah, they did sort of. They sort of did. They could have gone further, but Roger Goodell did make a statement.
Well, I mean, they still haven't given Colin Kaepernick a job.
Yeah.
And he does not have a job because he stood up for black people.
Yes.
At the risk of being redundant, not for people of color, but for black people. And he said, no, I'm not going to play football and act like this is not going on in the wake of another murder. I'm going to step up on my knees and protest. And that's why people who are inferior to him in terms of capacity to play football have gotten jobs over him. But the NFL apologized, but they didn't atone or do anything about their white supremacy. This is an example of performance. When people give wordsmithing to an alleged apology, but do nothing systemically to change things or to repair things. Mm-hmm. But I'm just going to say what I think is going on here, since we're not here forever. I think white people are having what I call a white disassociative safari. We know what a safari is, right? When people, usually white, go someplace and look at the natives. from their vehicle or whatever. And I think, and this is why the NFL apologized, though they didn't do nothing to change the landscape. I think that white people are involved in disassociative behavior, given the murder of George Floyd, and some of them right now feeling vulnerable because of unemployment, feeling vulnerable because of social restrictions, feeling vulnerable because we don't know what's going to happen with this COVID-19 thing. And some probably genetic level concerns around backlash. And the performance piece that G raised altogether, among other things, are creating white presence in these Black movements, because if right now, if you disassociate yourself from it by being in the presence of Black people, you don't look racist and you won't be called racist. Again, it goes back to what G said about performance. If you perform by proximity, like you're not a racist, you might not be seen as a racist. And there are some white people, even racist white people, who are ashamed by a public accusation of being called a racist, who prefer not to have that association and will go out of their way, including apologizing, giving BS, disingenuous apologies, to not be associated with racism, particularly after a high-profile murder. And another thing I want to put out there too, and I hope I'm not mixing too much, is that since white people are wanting to be comrades, as I'm told, I think it's important to understand that the damage that white supremacy does is not just in police brutality. For example, I've never asked white people this because I never cared what the answers were, but here you are, so I'm going to ask. How many of you watch television? Raise your hand, please, if you take a gander at television. Okay, that's most of it. All right, go on and admit it, Johnny. They're going to kill you. And
a lot of effort.
Name, particularly on ABC, CBS, CNN, on the station that everybody have access to, that you'll need a lot of money to have, like cable and all that stuff. Name a show on TV that has a reliable Black love story.
A reliable, what was it?
A reliable Black, I mean, every week you can go to this show, and that's not a comedy. Almost forgot to say that. That's not a comedy. Mm-hmm. That you're not laughing and there's not punchlines and a laugh track going after the end of every movement. But what white people get to have, which is drama, slices of life, movie of the week, shows on media that show Black people loving each other without a laugh track. Mm-hmm. Don't hurt yourself, but try to think of something.
I don't think I could even name that for white people. I mean, that's the kind of...
Oh no, there's lots of shows about white love. There's lots of movies and romantic shows about white folks loving each other, and shows on TV about that. But the question is not white folks this time. This is a whiteless moment in terms of intentionality. Name the Black show that's on television that shows Black people loving each other without a laugh track.
Is there one?
Blackish on Netflix.
Okay, that people always bring up Blackish, even when I say not a comedy. Isn't Blackish a comedy?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a comedy, and not with a biracial wife. That's a whole nother.
So we're saying this because.
So the answer to that question, you all, is no. They don't exist. So that's another example of mentally damaging and self-conceptually damaging white supremacy context that leads Black people to question their worth, question their value, and question their lovability. And little children watch these shows and are not given permission to have a critical analysis because we don't want to offend white folks or white Jesus or whatever other myths we can come up with. So the children sit there and learn to be Black white supremacists. And then white people who do the hiring are looking for Black people that make them comfortable. And they hire the Black white supremacists so they can be comfortable. And send somebody who's effectively able to be of benefit to people that look like them in the job market.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to give you an understanding of how this works, since the implication is that you care. Because the problem of white supremacy did not start with George Floyd's brutal murder and won't end with it. And if white people's involvement in being present in the midst of Black protests is based on performance or white disassociation to not be seen as bad and racist, therefore I'll be in that mix with a Black Lives Matter sign after the 1,000th murder that I know about. If we don't really look at these things from these nuanced perspectives, it's just a game. Mm-hmm. And that's my concern regarding, should I feel about time? I don't feel that way, like I said, or anything. I'm looking at trying to figure out what the hell is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, Dr. Cleo, you're saying you're not convinced with the presence of white people, and that what you're saying is the behavior belies in something. It's either performing or not one disassociation. Because I can particularly, as a Black person, see how you can be outraged of any race. I can definitely see that. The kill, what we saw was the kill. So I can totally understand why any human can be outraged. Now, I can't explain why the outrage of white citizens are such more outraged in this kill, but I can't say that I couldn't see why it would pull somebody out of their house of any color to protest. Now, my question is, how do we now package this type of outrage for the betterment of everyone, and especially Black people? Can we really dismantle the white supremacy apparatus that is around all of us? And is protest gonna be enough? Because it's never been enough. So what do we do from here? Because we can have all of these analogies. We have the presence. So can we use these allies to build, or remove them and we be in a better place? That's what I want to know.
So there are a couple of people who had their hands up. That
Okay.
question is in the air. I want to give folks who had their hands up an opportunity. I think, Crystal, you have your hand up?
I do. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to go back to a couple of things that I thought I heard Mr. Lefkowits. Okay, I'm sorry. I really messed that up. But one of the things that you mentioned was about, you know, and I think I'm paraphrasing it correctly, is going out of your way to make sure that Black folk or people of color, people that don't look like you, feel comfortable in the settings where you may become engaged with them. And so piggybacking a little bit on what Dr. Cleo was saying, it has been my experience that when I and I can only speak for me, when I walk into a room where there's predominantly people that don't look like me or white people, I feel fine. It seems to me that it's the white people that start feeling uncomfortable and go out of their way in some respect to address me or what have you. And the reason why I'm saying that is because until we get to the root cause of why so many, in particularly our Black males, are being targeted, which they've been targeted way back when, and I'll go back to the strange fruit on the tree hanging. It is because there is endemically a self-esteem issue and a fear issue within the quote unquote majority community, that when a Black male enters or comes around 5 police officers, so what can one do for 5? Or if a police officer, and I'm just using police officer as one example because there are many other of civilians who have treated our African-American males the same way. Why, when you show up for one Black man who's unarmed, maybe sitting in their car or just having a conversation with someone, you then call in 5 backup cars? Where if it is a white, so there is endemically a fear factor there, a fear of this Black man and his power and prowess as a human being, which I believe endemically, if we get to the surface of this and we talk about psychology, that a lot of white people don't feel. So we need to deal with the systemic problem within our specific communities of where this comes from. It is not just about a Black person feeling less than. It is a projection of that Black male feeling less than, because the actual perpetrator that's perpetrating against him or her is really the one who sees themselves as less than. Whether it's because they have looked at history and really don't see themselves there predominantly in history from the beginning, beyond taking something or having other people to build something from them. So when you say about coming in a room and making us feel comfortable, I think that that's not something that we necessarily need. Now, if 5 police officers come in a room and there's a Black male in there, yes, he needs to feel comfortable because they're being killed at an alarming rate. But on the general perspective, when we enter a room, we already have our self-esteem, our creativity, our empowerment intact, or we would not be entering the room. That's just the comment.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of individual variability with that, Crystal. I'm not talking about a small room. I'm talking about big, like, conference room with maybe hundreds of people. And I always, I mean, listen, it's a in the moment choice. It's a lot easier for me to hang out with people I know from Maryland who are, well, I mean, frankly, mostly white, but whatever, people I know from going to conferences. But I always go out of my way to try to introduce myself to people who may be new or people who may feel more excluded. So for whatever that means, and maybe, whether that's wrong or right, if someone's not interested in talking with me, they can always ignore me or walk away, which is fine as well. But I was just using that as an example. I think it was Kris, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was Kris or somebody else who mentioned it, that, about addressing racism or intolerance when you see it. So I was just speaking to the fact that there are ways that happen sometimes that are more subtle. But I think, we did get a little bit away from what Queen threw out there to the group.
Right. Well, I was just trying to give folks who had their hands up a chance.
Oh, sure.
They've been waiting to speak for a minute, so.
Okay, well, go ahead. You got any more hands?
I see Amy's hand.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment. I can only stay on another 10 minutes. This is great conversation. I'm a medical doctor near Boston, and I certainly understand that in history, there's a lot of mistrust with the medical field. I've learned that over time. I don't fully understand the perspective, but I have come to understand more what that means over history. So I know that's not easily corrected, but I just want to share a couple thoughts from the medical field, getting to know patients over the years who've been in situations where they haven't felt safe. Sometimes those are invisible things that people on the outside don't understand from someone's own personal home. And the experience of feeling unsafe can then open up a lot of empathy and compassion for others who also don't feel safe. So in medical school, we learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think as a culture in the past 3 months, a lot of people have suddenly been honestly terrified, right or wrong. They could have been terrified to step outside their house or truly terrified because they had to say goodbye to a loved one over Skype or Zoom who was dying. There's a fear, and suddenly all those other things just come to this visceral moment of just safety. And then originally during this first 3 months, there was some racial things happening with the Asian community where they felt discriminated against because of how this started. But then now, as things have developed, people have been more isolated, having that compassion and seeing, well, the Asian community is not being murdered by police officers. So there's this whole other level of understanding. And the final thing I'll say is I do think, from talking to patient after patient after patient on mostly virtual visits, but some in person, people are truly reevaluating their life each individual seems to be saying, like, wait, what's important here? What do I really want? They're not having the distractions of commuting and all the other normal distractions of life and keeping themselves busy and not really thinking about stuff that they shouldn't be thinking about. They're like forced to just be home. And a lot of them are reevaluating all kinds of things, like, do I even like this job? Do I want to go back to this job whenever they invite me back? Do I want to live in this place? And it's like this snow globe has been shaken up, and they're just like, okay, when all this settles, I am only going to be on this earth a certain amount of time. Like, what's really important to me? I'm hearing this from my patients. So I don't have the answers, and I really want to understand a lot more about it. But it's just a conversation starter. And I guess I felt uncomfortable about joining. And I want to make sure that each person can go beyond that piece of uncomfortableness and just do it. I think it's better.
Excellent. And we really appreciate that, because we need people to get past the inhibitions and jump in. We got to have these conversations. They're very important. All right. So what was anybody else with the hand up, Jim?
Tiff has her hand up.
All right, Tiff.
Thanks. Well, I did because I just wanted to address, there's also this dichotomy of, well, like Amy mentioned, a lot more white people are reevaluating what actually matters to us. You know, what matters in life, who do we want to be, how are we going to step up? But there's a difference between what we intend and how we intend to be entering the conversation and the actual effect that it has. So I wanted to bring that up as a large point that I hear being discussed within the white community, and how to be part of anti-racist efforts. You know, a lot of people are coming up from a place where we do care, and we want to change this system. We don't necessarily know how to change the system, because people in power don't necessarily care, and that's where voting becomes such an important piece of this. But if we're not operating from a place of very sincere awareness and self-reflection on the way that our actions affect others, and the way that our actions are perceived as, you know, again, this performative versus authentic, that's a real conversation that needs to be had. So I just wanted to bring that up. That's why I had my little hand raised.
All right. So that's it with the hands?
That's it with the hands.
Because it's a lot of us, and I just appreciate you guys' time, but I just think that we have to talk about real solutions. We have this other presence of, I would say, our white citizens. So can we kind of say, how are we going to ascend from this? What is going to happen next? Because after we get protesting, is everyone going to their little space again? The earth opens up, and then we carry on and wait for the next murder. So the question is, what are we going to do?
I think that so far, and I haven't paid relentless attention to everything, so I could be missing something. So far, the analysis that has come out of the protests and the pundits regarding this event have been too shallow for transformation. I mean, that's one reason why I mentioned, not that it's the best thing to mention, but that's what I mentioned about the love story and the lack of love stories and the lack of Black love in the culture that's so abstract to a lot of white people and some Black people, because we're intoxicated by normalized white supremacy, that we don't even recognize an assault on our humanity. Just like a lot of us use the N-word, which is a white supremacist insult, because it was forced on us for so many years. It's become behavioral and intercultural among Black people, but it really is an insult. I mean, to give an example, there's an equivalent word called kafir that some of you may have heard of. That's used in Tanzania or so-called South Africa by white supremacist racists to put down Black people. It has the same genesis and the same purpose as the so-called N-word, but because they have a linguistic and cultural memory, they are offended by the term and they don't use it among themselves. Because Black people have been sterilized and domesticated and completely separated from any kind of indigenous memory. Some of us don't even recognize an assault enough to resist it. So if the conversation about reducing the brutality of white supremacy on the masses is superficial, or just a reaction to disassociation, to not want to be like those people that killed George Floyd, and we're not doing a nuanced analysis of how white supremacy destroys souls and hearts and lives, people will wind up relapsing back into white norms when it becomes no longer PC to show up publicly at Black Lives Matters Plaza in Washington, D.C., which is probably going to be named its original name at some point. Who knows? The bottom line is that it becomes symbolic, like a dead body, like Malcolm X's body is symbolic. It's not powerful anymore because it's gone. So when these waves are gone, you get back into symbolism instead of social change. So I say all that to you, Queen, in terms of your question, is that that's my concern, is that it will go back and relapse back into white supremacist norms, because the analysis and the careful white supremacist leftist press keeps the conversation so surface. And surface is not enough for real world transformation. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's part of my concern about sort of the dilution of the protest by coming more general and coming more encompassing of everything that is wrong with the system. The more diluted it is, I think that precludes the level of depth that you're talking about in really understanding what's going on, or at least, that's sort of the concern that I have with it. It'll just kind of fade into the noise, and the will to make the deep changes might not actually happen. The follow through might not be there.
But one thing, and I'll shut up after this, I've talked a lot, but one thing that is positive about this whole thing is the universal mandatory use of body cameras, and that it will become illegal, and you will have to pay a price with your job as a cop if you accidentally forget to not remember to turn your body cam on. This is getting ready to become legislative and institutionalized law. That may save some lives, even though lots of Black people were killed on body cam. But now it's not an option. So that's one of the bright spots on a systemic level that could have come out of this. But again, the behavioral level and the intercultural level may or may not change.
I think, John, you had something, John?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. So first of all, I have seen really, I mean, yeah, sure, there's always some superficial kind of bland analysis of things, but I have read some great stuff in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, even Trevor Noah, he has some riffs where he describes his take on racial inequality, and he has a fairly unique perspective, being from South Africa, having been biracial, and what he's experienced in this country. Trevor Noah is great. I've seen some great interviews on MSNBC. There's a professor from Harvard who studies Black history and has talked about the profound public health damage that racism does, in addition to the violence that's perpetrated often by police. So I think in that way, I think there is stuff out there that's useful, but I think what's absolutely critical is voting. Because I've heard people create these false equivalencies of, well, we're gonna go out and protest or we're gonna vote. It's not an either or, it's an and. You know, because if you don't go to the ballot box, and, you know, I understand that in some places they make it there's all kinds of, you know, suppression against the Black vote, and they make it very hard for some people to legally vote, and that's, you know, illegal and criminal and horrifying. But wherever we can, I think you need to get out there and vote, and to some extent even get involved in local politics if that's something that interests you, to really try to influence things. And then I think there's a fascinating kind of question around, do we, you know, defund, you know, police? Do we look at reforming and restructuring? It seems like defunding police isn't going to have enough political support. So it's really about, I think, reforming and restructuring. But I think there's just a lot of important questions and a lot of important discussions that need to occur that address these issues in a meaningful, substantive way.
I would just like to comment as far as the news and what we see on TV.
Hold on for a second, Kris.
I don't know if I'm breaking up a little bit.
You're breaking up
You
just a
are.
little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
good.
I think as white people, we need to be careful what we believe, what we watch on TV, because CNN, NBC, all these major news channels are all ran by the white media, and they pick and choose who they put. And I don't mean to say this to discredit
It's true.
any Black person that's ever been on the news to speak about racism or things, but the people that they choose to put on TV aren't there to ask the tough questions. They are picked and chosen by the white media. And so we have to be careful because they're placed there strategically like it's a chess game, and it's made to make us remain comfortable with what's going on. So I just want to say that.
Absolutely.
Great assessment. Great assessment. Great assessment. Anybody else want to chime in on how we're going to ascend from here? What's next?
Yes. Tiffany, say something?
Yeah, thanks. So I was going to add to what Kris said. It's also about the ratings. What they're putting on the even the news is being manufactured for the ratings and how many viewers they're getting. But in terms of next steps, this is a question that is definitely heavy on my mind. And as a white person, what I have been following is continuing my own self-education, paying Black activists for their work and Black educators. Monique Melton is my new favorite one. I just took her anti-racism crash course, which was incredible, as well as amplifying Black voices, sharing their experiences through, just talking about social media platforms. But I have a lot of questions about how to go further. I mean, yes, getting involved in politics, voting, but I do have questions about how to keep this going. Like, how do we actually do the work of dismantling white supremacy? With white people, we're being called to deeply examine our own white fragility, have those difficult conversations with ourselves, with our fellow white people, and understand how insidious white supremacy is, and how concepts like white guilt have transformed into these really covert versions of white supremacy, like the white tears and the white savior complex. That is another thing I wanted to bring up, being very careful about seeing ourselves as the white saviors who are swooping in. Queen, you mentioned as the premise of this whole conversation, what about the white protesters who are putting their bodies between Black protesters and the police? What does that symbolize? And you had mentioned something about how could that possibly symbolize some kind of morphed form of white supremacy? And I think that's a really fascinating question. And that is why within the white community, there's so much conversation around this deep self-scrutiny. How does that exist within each of us? And how are we, whether it's inadvertently or not, upholding the structures of white supremacy? So I would also love to hear from you all what you think moving forward. Crystal, you had mentioned that white people need to, we need to be discussing these things within our own communities, and I think that's absolutely right.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Crystal.
Yeah. So exactly. So for each of the communities, like I said earlier, there needs to continuously be a parallel movement. One of the things I did want to respond to directly, Tiffany, and I'm not saying that this is for everybody who has done it, but I can almost see there's a syndrome, a medical term for, say, a parent or someone of authority who makes their child sick just to come back and be the savior of the child. I forget what it's called. It's some type of syndrome. So in essence, we could parallel that to, and I'm not saying that is the case, but we could parallel that to the white supporter who's putting themselves in between the Black person and the police, because it's something that the white community has created. So now we come back to be that savior of the victim from this sickness.
Wow.
So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as an illustration. Not that that's what's happened, but that's one illustration. So continuing to have those tough decisions, no matter what it creates. I saw a YouTube video where there was a young white woman. She was maybe about 20, and she was really going at it with her father, who was very kind of like in this total mode of lacking in intelligence about anything that was going on pertaining to Black people. So so having those tough conversations, regardless of what it feels like or what it costs, that's the only way we get past the pains. And that's got to happen at every opportunity. It can't just stop after the protests or after the movement or when we feel a little comfortable. We've got to have it when we don't feel comfortable, continuously, because it's a continuous conversation that if it does not result in some viable solutions, what it's going to do is it's going to kill an entire nation. That means white, Black, everybody, because our mindset is going to continue to be sickening, and we're going to die within our own thoughts, whether it's a physical death or a mental death. And that's part of what the problem is. Our police department, first of all, they need to be scrutinized for mental health issues more in depth before they even pick up a gun or go on the force, because many of them have mental health issues that have not been addressed. Many of them, if you go back in their own history, have been abusers to some sort or have been abused. That's one thing. As for our communities, the Black communities, what we have a tendency to do is once it seems like, everything's calmed down a little bit, we got another friend that doesn't look like us, we just go idly by and accept it. We've got to deal with our own trauma that has caused us mental issues that we don't, as to Dr. Cleo's example, that we don't show that love of self because of the trauma that has been impacted and perpetuated through years of saying we're not good enough. So we have work to do, and we have to continue to do that, but it's going to happen at a community level, case by case, day in and day out. This is not something that we have the right or have the time to sleep on. It is for the very life of our communities and for our children to come. So that's what each of us has to do. You've got to have those tough questions, conversations, even if the person stops speaking to you, even if the person curses you out, even if the person is physical, you've got to be willing to have that conversation. If you're going to lay down your life for something, let it be worth something. Let it be worth the full humanity as what this nation was created for. It's got to be full humanity or nothing at all.
The phenomena that you described is called Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Yes.
In terms of making your child sick so you can save it.
Yes.
Wow.
This is a very deep, nuanced matter. The matter of removing the deadly impact of what I call white supremacy myth. I always have the word myth because white people ain't no better than me. And I said, ain't no, just let my degrees to put some oomph on it. White folks ain't no better than me. So I always put it in the terminology of myth, because it's a myth. I've never been nobody better than me, particularly somebody white. I have to make that clear. But this is nuanced because we live inside of social, linguistic, and constructs that reiterate the myth of white supremacy being a reality and Black inferiority being a reality. Even the word white was constructed to create a false human hierarchy, to put people who are being called white who are from Europe at the top of it. And it's a myth. White is a myth, because you're really pink-ish. Just like so-called Black is a myth. So if we really want to get past the tendency to dehumanize people to the point of murder by law enforcement and systems, we have to look at a whole bunch of stuff, including the language that we use every day that implies that people have fair skin. And the fair skin is usually light or white, ironically. These are terms that recreate and become behavioral that manifest into things that lead to the compromise, murder, or difficulty of being Black in this society. So I get to the underbelly of stuff, because that's what we're going to have to do if we're serious about changing this situation. And I think that, for example, it was in 2000, I believe it was 2015, after somebody's murder, where they supposedly polled white people about how they felt about policing in this country. And in the wake of body number, whatever it was, most whites, according to 2 polls, said, oh, well, we cool with the police. Because they're protecting white folks. So why would white folks give up being protected by a system that that makes you not have to worry about? Like, for example, when I went to Ferguson after Michael Brown was murdered, I interviewed all kinds of people, and I talked to young Black men who talked about getting pulled over by cops and getting tickets because when a cop was behind them, they swerved because they were nervous, and their steering wheel would move, and of course the car would move, and it would be doing this because they were concerned about the cop behind them, and so they would pull over for reckless driving. And the white cops didn't give a damn about what I just said. They may or may not have known about it, but I'm just deconstructing how deep this white problem is and its manifestations, and how resolving it is linguistic, it's cultural, it's systemic. And you have to take a look among white folks about it. Am I willing to give up this? Because there's some good stuff in this privilege. Despite that, it's blood money. White privilege is blood money. It's the equivalent of blood money. It's not a neutral phenomenon with no casualties. White privilege results in George Floyd's murder, along with Sandra Bland and so many people. Those are the consequences of your privilege. So you got to look at whether you're willing to be white or human.
Okay.
Are you willing to be white or human? And what I mean by human is to care about other human beings, is to create equity across the human spectrum, and to not have to be so insecure that you need the illusion of your superiority to get up at the next morning and feel good about yourself. That you're so concerned about being seen as mediocre that you make up stuff like white folks, Egyptians were white. When I've been, and they make me look dark-skinned. Light-skinned. But if you watch the last film about Egypt, Tom Cruise was a star. So this is how deep and multi-dimensional this white problem is. And I'm not sure why folks want to give it up. I'm not sure why folks want to give up the blood money. And I think sometimes white people are in Black spaces or in some of these uprising spaces to make sure that they look safe enough where there will be no systemic transformation. So because we showed up, but when it's over, like the white people that were walking past my office with their "white people are too silent" signs, they went back to the suburbs. And none of the signs said, get rid of and dismantle whiteness. Get rid of the phenomena of white supremacy myth, which is at the core of why there's a stream of Black people who've been murdered and lynched over and over again because some white boy was feeling insecure and needed to feel better about himself. So there goes your life, like what happened to Emmett Till. So again, I'm not really feeling, encouraged until I hear. I'm not waiting on it. I'm doing my thing. I'm not tripping and waiting for this. I got stuff to do. But I will feel differently about my concerns when I see white people capable of having conversations that dimensional and who are talking about divesting from the blood money of white privilege, and that be how they discuss it. Until then, I'm not. I'm in this conversation right now with white folks because Queen asked me to. I don't even do this.
Well, the good thing is, I think a lot of people here are doing things they don't normally do, and if we don't do these, abnormal movements, we don't grow as people. So I get that, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad other people are here, because we need to see.
Hey, Dr. Cleo, I was like, when she told me, I was like, oh, word?
Yeah. Yeah, because I really think that, Dr. Cleo, we need to hear that, because you come from a psychological background and you have no tolerance anymore for anything white when it comes to the uplifting of Black people. And I get that. And that's because of your work. But I really think it was important for us to dive into this question, because we're talking about protests, and the protest will end. But the question is, where do Black people stand after, and where do white people stand? And is it just convenient today because we're in COVID-19, or really people really having authentic feelings about safety? I like what the doctor said, when everyone is feeling unsafe at this moment. So when they see someone else unsafe, it actually hits harder, because we're we're uncertain even in our lives. So having you here, Dr. Cleo, is important. Having other people in this spaces, other white people in this space, and I'm sure some of them feel uncomfortable, but these are the questions that we have to talk about. I'm not trying to, I didn't want to start an attack. I wanted to start a conversation, and I think it's important. And so what you're saying is important. What Tiffany said is important. What everybody's saying is really important.
Speaking
So
of,
what
Tiffany
I am
has
getting,
a hand up. Tiffany,
who has a hand up?
Tiffany, you know,
All right, Tiffany.
Tiffany, stay with a hand up.
This is the last point. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Well, I was just very moved by what Dr. Manago said, and Dr. Cleo, and you know, I really respect your point of view, and I'm glad that you were willing to join in on this conversation. And I just wanted to express that I think a lot of people are coming from a very authentic place of wanting to change our society, and it's such a big, like you're illustrating, and all the really fabulous points that you've brought up. It is such a deep issue that it feels overwhelming, and you know, I'm just trying to find my place in the conversation and figure out what to do in a respectful way that respects everyone's boundaries and agency, to try to do my part. And I think that's where a lot of these new white voices are coming from. But again, like I said at the beginning, that is what I would like to believe. So I guess as these protests die down, we're going to see how many people stick with the hard work. But
True, that's true. What you said is amazing. That's true.
I don't know how to raise my hand on here, but I have a question.
Go ahead.
Just do it like that. That's cool. You can go old school.
Oh, I thought there was like a button.
It is
I don't know how to raise my hand.
button, but you know, whatever.
Dr. Cleo, I would love to hear your perspective on you know, this November. Like, what is your perspective on people voting?
Hey, Dr. Cleo got to go. He said, look. He said,
no, give him, this is going to be some superpower. Hit him, Dr. Cleo. Hit them.
I do have
because in my opinion, like, I feel like the Black community, what reason does the Black community have to vote? Because not one politician is talking about, you know, building the Black community or giving reparations or anything like that. So I'm just confused as to what the hell to think about voting anymore.
Well, and
good question.
It is a good question, but at the last, if I have
I've been wanting to ask this whole time.
And I want to say that we have to look at, from my perspective, this voting process. We should have looked at all elections like this. I mean, Black people let Obama off the hook to be responsible to Black issues while he was president. So, because we didn't hold him accountable. So my point is that we're so busy, glad and excited that Stevie Wonder was at the White House and all kinds of superficial stuff that was being done, that we didn't look at some of the stuff that we need to do legislatively as Black people. But anyway, getting to the question, we have to start looking at issues long-term and prepare through these elections to create and locate decent alternatives to vote for. Right now, we don't got none, and it's all relative, because far as I'm concerned, Joe Biden is a leftist white supremacist. However,
Wow.
the other person that they call 45 and Cheeto and all these other terminologies is a straight up white supremacist who has loaded the judicial bench with young white supremacists to make sure that for the next 50 years or so, there will still be white people in place on a legislative basis to keep white control over this system.
Yes.
If we are alert, and since Biden is claiming to be an alternative to Trump, we can watch him, hold him accountable, and make him different from Trump. We can't do that silently. And we definitely can't do that if he's not in the White House, which is not a metaphor this time, the White House. So we have to vote for the less of the two white supremacists who is claiming to care about black people and got black people in pictures and black sisters waving from the back of his head and stuff, all these pictures he's taking. He got more black people around him than Freaknik or a funk concert. He's just got black folks everywhere. Since he's acting like he give a damn, we need to hold him accountable and make him give a damn or expose him for being full of crap. But whether he's full of crap or not, we need to watch this system of candidates for the next 4 years and the next 8 years to help manifest somebody who's decent for real. And so we got to do this in terms of, comparative. Again, compared to Trump, who's on the right side of white supremacy, Biden's on the left white supremacy and is talking smack about being supportive of black people. We have to hold him to that. We can't hold Trump because Trump didn't even say it. He has black moments these days more than usual because he's trying to win the election. So he has going to black churches. He's going to Tulsa, Oklahoma, I think next week to the spot of one of the worst massacres against black people and black progress in this country historically. He's going there purposely to do something black. So he is pandering, but he's not good as pandering as Biden.
We need more judges like Olu Stevens.
When they took him off the bench immediately.
Yeah, we need more.
I said this is a process. We have to hang in there. And
it's a long process.
It's a long process, but we have to hang in and do the process. Because guess what? That's what white folks did. That's how Trump became president. White homosexuals, white feminists, white women who were 50% of the people that put him in there, waited and endured Michelle and Obama, said, okay, when this is over with, we're going to get the whitest thing on earth and put them in the White House and make America great again. They had patience. We got to be patient too. Thank you all for listening. I want to say that, particularly with you, Tiffany, and you, Kris, I can feel your heart. I can feel your decency, attempting to rise and be present to transform this society. And I hope you develop the literacy, the dimensional literacy and insight to do all the different things it will take to make it a safer place for people who are not under the rubric of whiteness, and work on dissolving that rubric so we can all be human and stop being at each other's throats. But I want to reiterate, I see your heart and I appreciate your heart. And thank you, Queen and G, for inviting me into this conversation that I wouldn't have had otherwise with some white folks.
Right, that's why I was like, oh.
Well, we're glad you were.
I said, don't blame it on you. But anyway, and I'm honored to see your hearts, Tiffany and Kris. I mean, I say that sincerely, but I have to go.
Well, Doctor, it's been a complete honor to be on this panel with you. I've really appreciated and learned so much from everything you've had to say. Thank you.
Yep, we're leaving. Tiffany, you want to say anything before we get out of here?
Ditto. Yeah, no, thank you so much for your valuable insight. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Brother John left us. He had to bow out. Brother John.
And thank you, Quincy, for putting this together. And G, thanks for all the awesome technical work. You guys are awesome.
And all of our visitors, David, and thank our visitors, G. We appreciate them.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny, Justin, he's been in the background listening. David sat through. I think he's gone. Oh, there you are. Hey, David.
The whole time.
Yeah, the whole time. Appreciate you. Absolutely.
We had Jenny rolling with us.
Well, I'm Tiffany's mom, you see. So.
Oh, that's what's up. We love that support.
Yeah, and Amy is her sister. So,
oh wow, love it, Amy too. Beautiful.
I wish
So, yeah, it was fascinating. Thank you. Thank you.
Family
Really
affair.
awesome.
Justin, you want to say anything, Justin?
No, I appreciate the let me listen in. There's a lot of road noise where I live, so I tried to stay on mute just so I didn't interrupt. But I really enjoyed all the conversation and greatly appreciate it.
We appreciate having you. We really do. Crystal, we appreciate you, of course. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
My
So,
pleasure.
you're welcome.
Much love, everybody.
Guys, we thank you. This has been a great conversation. Let's work real hard together. That's the only way we can get rid of racism. All right. Be blessed, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Queen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's outro.
Reflect. Yeah, reflect.
Reflection. I think we're going to call this reflection.
All right.
Reflecting. That's black. Reflecting. You know I'm flecking.
Okay. So this conversation, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. It was a little bit different than what I thought it was going to be, just given who all was in the room in addition to the invited guests. Sure. You'll notice that there was an audience present who was really there more to listen than anything else. And I think that that gave the conversation a different dimension because, you know, when you're speaking directly to the audience and you can see their how they are processing what you're saying, I think it added a lot to the experience of having the conversation. So appreciate
our audience is mostly white.
Correct.
Which made sense. And
right.
That's why I think the conversation is so important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So my background specifically has put me into a space where I'm very accustomed to white people who are extremely active in issues of social justice and issues of social justice that relate to Black people just by nature of this being a predominantly Black city. Mm-hmm. So the circles that I roll in, I'm used to seeing white people advocating and allying with Black people in different areas of action. So that aspect of engagement wasn't new. I guess just the physical presence at the protest and just the energy of this specific protest, the magnitude just seems bigger. That was my impression coming in. I'm used to seeing people engaged, but the magnitude of it and the scope of it just seemed bigger this time. So going into the conversation, that was really what my impressions were.
And we are on different ends of that spectrum. I live in a Black world, per se. I work in a setting that is white dominated. And so they don't have any, it is nothing about social justice. I work in the medical field.
Right.
And it's white dominated. And first of all, we hardly even have those type of conversations. I don't even know of time I've had, unless I've initiated or they've commented on my Africanness, that we have those type of conversations. But since this protest and all of this unrest has happened and I have worked, nothing. No one has said anything. They're very quiet. It's like I'm working around
eggshells. Everybody on eggshells.
Yeah, they used to be rats. Now they're church mice. You know what I'm saying? They went to their cousins. So I've seen that even like when I enter the building, it's like everyone's quiet.
Right.
But they know I'm African anyway. And I'm only there on the weekend, so I'm not able to kind of push the conversation that I would normally do when I was full time. You know, I had people on their on their back of their shoes all the time. So for me, this has been very enlightening to see, because my background is there's no love for the Black, real talk. And you're just getting in where you fit in. You have the education, but really your voice doesn't matter, and your presence is only there because they have to. That's the truth. And so when I see this protest, to me, it's a great thing to see for symbolism. It is absolutely an amazing thing to see. I'm coming. It's absolutely amazing thing to see when it's symbolic of how young people are change agents.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's symbolic of how they're not as infected as we are. Because I just believe 30 and older, you're infected. The white supremacy apparatus, I don't care what color you are, has infected you to a point that in some way it affects your movements, your thought, or your perspectives. Because you've been around it for 30 years. 10 years is enough. Excuse me.
Right.
5
So,
years is enough.
well, see, I think too, when you put that number out there, that's almost like a generational marker too, because that gets into like the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation.
Yep.
So I think that generational conversation, I think, is a really important one too. Digital natives, basically, young people who've grown up in a connected world that have always had the ability to create communities of interest outside of their geographical space.
And outside of their color too.
Outside of their color. So the thing that's interesting about communities on the internet in general, I think that they are more, in the beginning especially, they are sort of affinity groups around interest. Because you are interested in something, you are a gamer, you are something other, and then you find other people, find other people who are into like what you're into. And it's easy to do that even if you're in a small town with no scene. And you have sort of the safety of your own room that you're in, but you can talk to people and find people who kind of share this affinity for this thing or this interest or this knowledge. So there's been a lot of self-organizing communities around identities that include race, but also include other areas of intersecting identities. So there are a lot of times the people who've always been isolated before because they haven't been able to find people to relate to, they've used both the performative nature of social media and the community nature of social media to connect with people and to signal the things that they're interested in so that other people can recognize, okay, maybe that's somebody who...
And you spoke about the signaling.
Yeah.
You did speak about that. And that is it's such a it's real pivotal when it comes to the conversation because young people communicate in a different way.
Absolutely. And you know, we always did. Like young people always
did. You're right.
Because your swag, like it's as simple as your swag when you went to school was trying to say something. We always communicated with signals to figure out which clique we were with. It's always. So you always
trying to techno signal.
Now it's bigger than just.
And it's international. It's technological and it's international. So you see how young people can signal each other, and they're not as infected not to show up because they see injustice without all of these. They have filters. They can filter out what's right and what just inherently to them doesn't feel right. And they act upon it.
Right.
You know,
because you can get.
We see movement from they're recognizing something that is unjust or they think that's not right.
Right.
They're talking to their community about it.
Right.
And they're showing up.
Right. Yeah. And there's built-in social accountability with that because when you are vocal, when you are always out there posting and, you know, if you out there, then like, okay, what's up now? Why you quiet? What's up? This.
That's what they say about Jerry Jones. Where you at, Jerry? You talk about everything, Mr. Dallas Cowboys.
Right. So I think there is a level of social accountability that is kind of built into the way these communities work. And they have
history. They don't want to look horrible in history. You know,
and history is
the implications of their behavior. They understand it.
So the thing about history that a lot of people forget about is there's an element of history that is recent history, like somebody pulling up a tweet that you had. So it's so easy to be on wrong
on the wrong side
because you are documenting every thought that you've had.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
So amazing you said that. People don't get it. Every time you're tweeting or sending a text,
it's out there.
That's your emotion right there. And somebody that's a digital imprint and they can bring that out.
Yeah, so there's people who
understand this shit.
Yeah, so there's
Correct.
people born, and you know, there's people born now who've had basically their entire lives documented online in real
There
time.
you go. There you go.
So they have an awareness of how they are positioned against the prevailing conversations and the norms that are going on, and they respond to that directly. So I think that the social dynamics of the way the movement spreads, it's really kind of the perfect storm of marrying the technology and the sort of the psychology of young people who grew up endemic to it, rather than people who were older and adapted to it.
Prophetic. That's what we see. And that to me is the reasoning for the uprising of white involvement in Black protests. The recognition of the wrong, but also the technological movement to try to quell that wrong.
Right.
And that brings out communities of like people who just touch each other via the computer, and then they show up.
Right.
But they do that for everything. Even when they meet up, they hit the computer and everybody meets.
Right.
When they're ready to fight, they all meet through the computer and then they go fight each other. This is how young people communicate.
Right.
And so we see white kids are showing up because they inherently don't like what's going on, and they have some sort of guilt. It has to be that this has happened, and you can't even, history shows it continues to happen.
Right.
So what we're seeing is a lot of different layers of movement in one protest, I think, other than Black Lives Matter.
Right. Well, it is definitely beyond Black Lives Matter. I think that that kind of opened the door.
Yep.
But there's a whole lot of conversations that are happening with that door open. And
John alluded to that. And that was what John alluded to, the brother Lefkowits. And he was right in a lot of ways. But that is the dilution of the white involvement. Because they have this openness to include all of the wrongs.
Right. Well, see, that's the thing. Right.
And our problem is Black people dying in the street, and we don't want to hear about no more wrongs right now. We want to hear about Black people dying. So John, he brought up a prophetic point, but that's what white people do. They bring all of the elements to the table.
Yeah. And I think that the theory behind that in many respects is, from the way that I understand it, is it goes into the idea of intersectionality, because if you're a marginalized community, by definition, you're going to be a minority and your voice is going to be limited by that. So if you are looking at, if you have more than one marginalized group, if you are banding together, that gives you that much more of a voice. So it's sort of like it's like a wave that kind of, like, you know, a wave that's going down the hill. When it's rolling down, a snowball is rolling down the hill, it's picking up. It picks everything up on the way down, and when it gets down.
That's what Amy alluded to. You know, she said that when people suffer, everybody brings their suffering more or less to the table.
Right.
And
it opens
then
you up. Yeah.
Coalesce these alliances it coalesces alliances through the suffering.
Right.
And so since people are not working, people are hungry, people losing their jobs, other people feel marginalized, then this big issue of racism brings everything to the table. All the ills hit the table at once.
Right, because racism, I think, as a concept, is sort of the perfect storm of injustice, because it goes right to a trait that you are born with that you don't have any control over, that a person is judging you by. It has nothing to do
controlling you and building up narratives around. Yes.
Right. So so I think the biggest thing with that, and I think I might have raised a point in the conversation too, is the more specific and sort of policy focused and legislation focused the energy is, the more good it's going to do. So
you said it has to be more structured. It has to stay structured and stay intentional, or
right,
you lose what you're trying to do because it's so diluted. That's what you
right,
said.
right,
Your
yeah,
answer.
yeah.
That's
So
true.
and I think that a lot of times the people whose voices raise up in a situation like that, they understand that there is something that's wrong. They may not have an answer, and then they say, well, it's not my responsibility to tell you how to fix it. You got to fix it. You know, I don't know how to fix it, but I know it's wrong. And that's basically what most people are saying.
That's what the guest said. They,
right. You don't know how to fix it. You know that it's wrong. So I
Yeah,
guess then really getting clear about the
fix.
yeah, well, getting clear about some very specific things. And I've seen some policies that get proposed when you're talking about like police reform and defunding and reallocating funds from police to different places. There are some very specific things that are out there that could possibly make things better.
That they're talking about, but they're
right.
also like, you know, the symbolism for Europeans is still apparent. They feel that if you take down Confederate statues, if you change
That's all.
army bases,
that's all very well and good.
If you change army bases and all of that, that means something to Black people. It doesn't
though.
Let me make you guys understand. We don't give a damn.
We don't care about
what we care about is our children dying in the streets.
Right. Yeah. So
that's what we care about. Only. We don't care about your statues because we've lived around these.
They don't. Yeah. So
they don't matter.
Yeah, I don't care about none of that. And
they're
I have
not right, but we don't give a damn.
Right.
What we care about is vigilantes and police killing Black people and making excuses, and there's no punitive measures towards them. That's what we care about.
Right. So yeah, I think the symbolic movements are
killing it.
Well, they're very splashy.
They're symbolic, bro.
They serve right. They serve the purpose of raising the awareness, but they are meaningless without very specific policy reforms or legislative changes behind.
But it's not raising awareness for the people. It's for white guilt and fragility.
Well, here's the thing, though.
It has nothing to do with Black people. It has to do with white folks that finally recognize and they think that's going to help. It won't.
Well, no. What I mean by raising the awareness is when people, when those policies come on the table, then the votes to support those changes and the actions on that level, the more it's front of mind for people when it's time to make the decision what the policy will be, the better the chance are of getting those things passed. So even though the statute coming down itself isn't doing anything, people are looking at that and say, well, what's going on here? And it makes people look. So when it's time to vote, when it's time to bring people in, and this is an election year, and there's a lot of things happening sort of on the level of local government where really every municipality has their own situation going on with the police, and they have to figure out what they need to do. So having this conversation broadly, I think still can translate into a police district in a town making a change in the way that they do things. You know,
well, it's happening. I mean, if we look at the news of what's happening, like it's a city in Minnesota, they won't even let the police in. They cannot come in. They're doing their own patrolling. They've taken over.
Well, I mean
that's happening. That's something vigilante. Black folks can do that. I know that's not a Black town because that wouldn't go down for us. But that's what's happening. You have city councils that's defunding no police in schools anymore. So it's things coming out of and I think that makes sense. I think that it should never been cops in schools. I think that we should never go that far. I think it's a lot of things that we can change, but we got to get off of this symbolic. You put a plane in the air with Black Lives Matter, or we go downtown and the building is painted black, red, and green, and that's supposed to make us happy. We're looking for substantive movements,
right?
Policy initiatives, and some I think they need to invest directly in the black communities and black initiatives directly, not throughout the city council so it can be dispersed by white hands. It needs to be directly divested in the community, in the children, in the schooling, in the programs that is going to make people feel like they're a part of this fun country and give them access to what this country can bring to most people that haven't been brought to black people. So I think we need real movements, and that's my only thing. I'm sick of the symbolism. So from what we spoke about, do you think we have some good measures to try to really go about real change from that conversation? Do you think we came up with real initiatives from the white community that would help our plight as black people?
No, I think what I came out with was just a different level of understanding. And understanding is sort of the kind of understanding where people were and how they were seeing things. And what that does, it gives you an idea of what their capacity is, how they can help, you know? Because having understanding where a person is, yeah, if you don't know where a person's head is at or what their thoughts are on a thing, then you really, even if they could do something that was useful to that could have a positive benefit, you wouldn't know what to ask for if you don't understand what their capacity is, or if you don't understand the way that they're seeing their role or what their environment is like in the way that they're seeing things. So having that level of understanding, and I think that seeing witnessing a genuine willingness is extremely valuable.
It is.
It is. So I think
just the presence is valuable.
Right. Yeah. The willingness and the openness is, I think, is important, and understanding what the solutions have to be. I guess it's really a question for, like, we here in Baltimore, people might be saying this in all different places. Some of the people that we talk to are in different places. So the solutions might look a little different in every place. But I think the big thing is having a clear understanding of who is presenting themselves to be of assistance, having a clear understanding of some very specific things that they can be advocates for and with. I know there are a lot of petitions that are being signed, and there's a lot of legislation that's being pushed forward. There's a lot of money that's being donated and raised for different bail funds, and there's a lot of action on that level. People sharing a whole document full list. Okay, these are all the different black businesses, or these are all the different places that you can donate. These are positions that you can sign to get this legislation in the, So there is a lot of that's happening that I kind of see people doing. And I think just more of that, and more recruiting other people and bringing other people in who can build momentum to that side of the equation. Everybody don't need to be out in the street. That's not everybody's ministry. It is. Somebody needs to stay in the house.
A revolution has to have pieces.
Stay in the house.
You got to have the researcher. You got to have the techno.
Right.
You got to have it all.
Right. Stay in the house.
In the street.
Yeah. Cook some dinners for some families that need some help.
Yep.
Do to somebody. You dig? Because we know that there's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of needs that are unmet that kind of feed into a lot of the issues that we have in the community. And I think that looking at it from a human standpoint and understanding sort of what your unique gifts and skills are, if you're working in your highest capacity, in the capacity where you have the best ability to make change happen, then you give your highest contribution. So that's really all I ever want a person to do, is like bring their gifts to the table. I want to understand what it is that you can do that maybe somebody else can't do as well as you, and bring that to the table.
Bring that to the table.
Yeah.
And my final thought is, I'm going to say ditto, because you're the smartest one in the room. So I'm always going to say ditto to what you said, because what you said was the truth. And I like what you said. But my final thought is, if we all work within our own universe, and when I say that, your community or whatever, your own spaces, we work in our own universe and be very effectual in that universe and help someone, imagine how the world will change.
Right.
We go out to help other people, but you have people right in your universe can use this type of help.
Right.
Help someone right in your universe. And ensure that they help someone in their universe.
Right.
Who ensures that they would help. And now we got a movement of the gift. And I think it has to be personal. If you want this system of white supremacy, the apparatus, as I call it, the WSA, if you want the white supremacy apparatus to change, one of the biggest is kryptonite starts with unity.
Relationships. Yeah,
relationships. The reason why white supremacy works so well is the lack of relationship. So we definitely have to go into our own universes. That's my final thought, and clean up our own dough before we run down to Lombard Street with a sign. You get what I'm saying? Clean your own dough up.
Right.
So that's my final thought on that. And my final saying will be, change we must, or die we will. That's it. Change we must, or die we will. So we have to make changes so we can have a thriving society. And right now we're not thriving, we're just existing. So we have to change. So I love what we did tonight, hearing other voices. It was good for me. It was very enlightening. And that's it. That's all I have to say. Queen of B, BlakBoxx Radio, the AmASSI Center for Black Wellness and Culture. Dr. Cleo couldn't be with us. He had something to jump on, so we're kind of talking for him, but we thank him for his analysis.
Right, absolutely.
Thank all of the people. Who would you bring in, G? Let's thank your folk.
So Tiffany Black.
And all of her folks. She got Jenny Black.
And Amy. Yeah.
Tiffany the family.
Yeah,
to the Black family. I love it. How funny is that? We want to thank the Black family.
Right.
And we want to thank John Lefkowits for his genius and his perspective.
Absolutely.
We want to thank Kris Furnish.
Absolutely.
Definitely for her input. The illustrious Crystal Parker.
Yeah.
What would we have done without Sister Parker? So we thank her too. That was it, right? And then we had some other guests that didn't speak.
Right.
Young males, and we appreciate them being present. They were there the whole time, and they just listened. So that was a great thing. So stay tuned. We get ready to do some good stuff. We're starting a forecast series, Black Forecast, Black Baltimore Forecast. So it's coming.
All right.
Holla at us. G, take us out.
All right. If you've enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. You go to BlakBoxxRadio.com. That's BlakBoxxRadio.com. You can find all the great content that we've been creating over the last it's going to be a year before you know it. A lot of great stuff there. You can find us, if you're watching us here, probably you might be watching us on YouTube. You can find us there. You can also find us on all major podcast platforms at BlakBoxx Radio. So check us out. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at BlakBoxx Radio, and find us on Twitter at BoxxBlack. That's BoxxBlak.
Oh yeah. So listen, we closing out this conversation series. BlakBoxx Radio. We out.